from the European Union for the member states and, of course, for common European domains.
So, European leaders in Lancaster House in London. Let's go to Brussels, where often they usually are for EU talks. Not today. There are more countries involved, like the UK and Turkey, and countries not involved, like the Baltic states. Here's Dave Keating, our correspondent. Dave, just talk us through the dynamic of what's been going on today. Who's in, who's out?
Yeah, I mean, this is basically the same format that was happening 2 weeks ago in Paris that President Macron was organizing. And it's essentially trying to bypass the dysfunction of the European Union and NATO, who don't have the infrastructure right now to be dealing with this crisis because they have problematic members who can throw a spanner in the works. That's why this is happening outside of any actual institutional framework. But the consequence of that is that they are leaving a lot of countries outside in the cold. So today's meeting in London was a mix of different countries, some in the EU, some not in the EU, all of them in NATO. But key countries were missing, most notably, for obvious reasons, Hungary and Slovakia, because their leaders have openly said that they want to block any further action to help Ukraine. And of course, we have to acknowledge that the reason this is not happening in a NATO format here in Brussels is not just because of Hungary and Slovakia, but also because of the United States. But the problem is Europe hasn't developed its own command and control structure or any kind of infrastructure to be holding meetings like this. So this is all impromptu. This is ad hoc. Now, we saw when Macron hosted those meetings 2 weeks ago, some countries got angry, particularly Czechia and Romania voiced their frustrations about not being invited. Macron solved that by having a second summit with all the B team, the people who weren't there at the first meeting. It looks at today's meeting, Czechia and Romania were there, so it looks like they kind of shouted their way into the meeting this time, but it was very conspicuous that the Baltic countries weren't there, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, given how vulnerable they are to Russian attacks and how central they've been to this whole discussion on Ukraine so far.
Very interesting as well, language used. Are you sensing a difference here on whether the US is or isn't an unreliable partner, especially after what Keir Starmer just said?
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of the leaders were asked this on their way out. Keir Starmer insisted, no, the U.S. is not an unreliable partner. The alliance is as strong as ever. Donald Tusk was a little more measured, a little more realistic, but he said basically it can't happen. He didn't say that the U.S. isn't unreliable, but he said that this partnership cannot fail, that this partnership is essential. So kind of a more aspirational statement from him. But this is really the elephant in the room here. Nobody really wants to address what happened there in the Oval Office on Friday, but they do want to express their full support for Ukraine and President Zelensky without making the U.S. president angrier than he already is. This is an extremely delicate tightrope that they're watching. The other interesting thing to watch here is how this is going to interact with this summit that's happening on Thursday here in Brussels. Starmer said all these leaders are going to meet again very soon. Unclear whether he was talking about Thursday's summit, which is also an emergency summit here in Brussels. As far as I know, as I've been told, he's not planning on attending that summit. So it's a little unclear how the ideas discussed today will feed into that meeting on Thursday.
The ball's back in your court, Dave. We'll speak to you on Thursday. Dave Keating, thank you, our correspondent in Brussels. To that point, let's bring back in Ketavan Gurjestani, our international affairs editor.